Hey everybody, welcome back to another movie review. Hope you guys been enjoying the content channel as of late. It's the first review actually of this year. I was hoping to check this out last year, but my theaters never didn't have this film playing until now. So I finally went and checked this film out, and I have some thoughts. That film that we're going to be discussing today is This Thing On, which was co-written and directed by Bradley Cooper, who you guys may be familiar with a couple movies here and there, but as a director, he's directed films such as Star is Born with Lady Gaga, and most recently with Maestro for Netflix. This is his third feature, and this is starring Will Arnett and Laura Dern, as well as Bradley Cooper himself. Co-written also with Will Arnett, as well as other players here and there. And as the story goes, it follows Will Arnett and Laura Dern as they are a recently divorced couple, and they are dealing with the fallout of that in their own ways, having to move through the new dynamics that are presented within their relationship, with their kids, and just surrounding themselves with each other every so often, and the awkwardness that comes from it. And we focus on Will Arnett's character, who is rather distant and trying to establish himself in some way, or at least to find his footing. And he finds his footing one day as he's walking through the streets of New York, at a comedy club, and he decides to participate. And he finds himself intrigued by the environment, and for him, it is rather therapeutic. And as the story progresses through his interest in comedy and more or less a passion that is revived, that extension may be made towards his relationship itself, the dynamics that he has with people, and perhaps finding a new purpose in life in the face of, a great sorrow and disappointment that has came before him within his divorce. So when it comes to Bradley Cooper as a filmmaker, I've noticed he's been, progressing lately. With A Star Is Born, it was it was fine. It wasn't anything completely noteworthy or outstanding. For what it was fine. It wasn't anything more than just a showcase of his performances, really. And Maestro, I felt, was actually a little bit more than that. I felt that it was more of a complete narrative, and actually felt had more impact than what A Star Is Born provided. So going into this, I was intrigued because I liked kind of the tame nature that the film was providing, kind of a low key, low tier type of deal. And to begin, that's one of the great strengths of the film is how casual it actually is. It's not a movie that is trying to be rather big in terms of its dramatic arcs, or about this or that. It's very casual in its study about dynamics and the mess that is within those dynamics and relationships specifically. And I think you get good performances at the center of it, Will Arnett especially, because he walks that thin line to where I can see the humorous parts of his performance, but more or less underneath that character, more or less absolutely, is this air of loneliness and this air of depression that lies within that character. And Will Arnett brings that out, I think, quite well. Um, any other performances here are fun. Bradley Cooper, kind of playing this this just out of place type of character. I weirdly enough want to present it as like a he's like a deeply insecure type, but he has like this because he's always like hooked on like drugs or alcohol. He's like one of those types. I don't know how you would define it, but he's just kind of like that sort of caricature. Um, But as it stands, outside of those performances and generally what the craftsmanship is doing, which is providing a layer of authenticity and a layer of substance, as is the performances are, mostly in the efforts of Will Arnett. I wasn't particularly fond of what Laura Dern. I found her performance to be um, um, like it's the phrase of "you're trying too hard," you know. And I think that that was kind of applicable to Laura Dern's performance here. There's times where I could see that she's just pushing it too hard, and I just feel as though a little more restraint would have helped. Whereas Will Arnett's actually providing that restraint, and it works very well in his favor. But my issues with the film came with twofold. I think that firstly, I think that it is way. I think it is too long. I think that it drags itself out quite a bit because um, it it is ultimately the sum of its parts, and it is essentially about what I just described: the mess that comes within dynamics and within relationships, and specifically when it comes to these two, Will Arnett and Laura Dern, and just the constant, the why, why that it doesn't work, and and why they cannot find that common ground. And a lot of that time it just feels like the film is kind of spinning its own wheels, and it's not moving any further than that. And when it does actually move further, that actually leads to my second issue with the film, which is an overall story. Because what I thought the film was going to be about for the first half was about the fallout of a marriage and how people come to finding their own paths outside of that, and less so about the about the rekindling of such a relationship. Not to spoil anything, but to kind of put it in a certain context. This is essentially has the building blocks of a rom com, in that you kind of know what the conclusion is going to be, but there's the trajectory can be like seen as this and that, but where eventually things will probably end up going. It has that spirit to it where it is kind of operating on that sort of sphere, and it's rather unfortunate because I was hoping that it would have gone in a different direction. I was hoping for it um, to have been what it was establishing in the first half, which was these characters being distant from each other, and then having these awkward moments where they do have to be around each other, and it's weird, it's off-putting. They don't know necessarily how to interact with each other, and there's still this underlining breed of tension, that is there. I was hoping that that's what the film overall was going to be about, and that the comedy that Will Arnett was doing was going to be more or less explored as a therapeutic tool, and how he might be exploiting that. That's what I was hoping the film would do. But instead, what it does is that it just kind of lets these elements stay, and then introduce a certain mess that doesn't necessarily provide heft or substance, but just mess. And it doesn't come across as sincere, but more or less just messy. So, so I wasn't a fan of where it went. I liked where things were going, but I didn't like where we ended up. And I wouldn't say that it was a make like it's not like it's not to say that the movie did like a whole 180. It's just to say that the first half of what it was trying to get at and to where we end up, I don't necessarily think is um, it doesn't feel like progression as much as we are um, both digressing but also devolving simultaneously. And it's rather unfortunate that you have something that doesn't feel as earnest towards the end, and at the same time feels long-winded and overstays its welcome. So I think that you have some good performances at the center of it. I think Will Arnett does interesting work. Bradley Cooper also think does interesting work here. But Laura Dern, like I said, I just have my issues with. I just didn't really buy into what she was doing a lot of the time. I felt like she was just trying to push it out, but just more restraint would have helped. Um, and I do think that there's good craftsmanship here. I think Bradley Cooper behind the camera. I think that there is potential in what he does. And of the three films that he has done, this would be my least favorite. But I do appreciate that he is trying to put out films like this and not trying to become like any other filmmaker nowadays, where they just do little one small thing and they go off and do something for the big studios and stuff like that. I like that he is doing some original pieces, or doing original pieces here and there. um, so I hope that he continues. But as far as what we have here, I do believe that it's long-winded. I do believe though that it is uh, it the progression of where they go with the story, I don't necessarily like, and I also think that he needs to build up his confidence as a filmmaker because, as I've noticed in the movie, there's a lot of times where they establish things, and the film feels the need to explain what they had established. For example, the whole point about him, Will Arnett's character, going to comedy clubs, being that of a therapeutic tool. At some point, a character breaks, literally says out loud, "Oh, it almost acts like therapy for you." Like moments like that, and it happened more than once, where I noticed that things are happening without the dialogue or necessarily have to literally say out loud what is happening, for a character then to say later on what happened, what occurred there emotionally. And it's like we don't necessarily need that. And that's a demonstration, do I feel, of a lack of confidence from the filmmaker. Um, and I don't, I think I had an issue with that in Maestro as well. So I don't know, I could be wrong, but I do believe it's something that he needs to work on, where he needs to be a little more confident with what he is doing. And in the case of this, I just think that they had a good foundation, and then it just got real messy. And that might, in fact, be the point, given the context, given what it's about. But in this case, it works against itself and not elevate it to anything more meaningful than what is just the sum of its parts. So, so yeah. So those are my thoughts on Is This Thing On? I think it's fine. I think it's my least favorite of his work. I still think Maestro is my favorite, and then I would probably put A Star Is Born, and then I'd probably put this. It just goes for too long. I feel like just where we end up, how we ultimately, it being that of a rom com is more disappointing than being a dissection of what I thought was going to be, which was about the falling out of a marriage, a falling out of a relationship, and how you come to find forging specific paths, and moving through in that direction. Kind of like a Kramer versus Kramer type of situation where, you have a falling out of a relationship and then ultimately forging a specific path, that still has to deal with the side of what was, with marriage, the divorce and all that, but of ultimately forging your own path. I thought that's where I was going, and then it decides to go very typical fashion for what would be a rom com, and it's not really digging that. But you guys, let me know your thoughts on Is This Thing On? If you guys checked it out, it didn't have a huge run last year, but now it's starting to expand out, it seems. So if you guys plan on checking it out or have seen it, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and your guys' thoughts on his other films if you guys have checked them out. Let me know all your thoughts relating to this in the comment section below. And I feel like I said that like 3 or 4 times. My apologies. But that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. And until then, I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye.